The Varkon Empire took Earth's weapons first. Missiles vanished from launch sites. Warships were emptied. Tanks stood silent behind alien security fields. And the libraries stayed open. The invasion had been brutally efficient because the Varkon believed efficiency was the same thing as understanding. They had studied human armies before landing. They knew where military bases were located. They knew which facilities held ammunition, aircraft, armored vehicles, communication systems, and strategic weapons. They knew which ports serviced warships and which underground bunkers protected command staff. So when the attack began, they moved directly toward everything that looked dangerous. Human forces resisted, but the Varkon had come prepared for resistance. They surrounded bases before defenders could reorganize. They seized weapons depots. They disabled launch systems. They stripped ships of anything that could fire. They searched command centers for hidden arsenals and forced captured officers to reveal storage sites. Every object designed to kill became a priority. Guns were cataloged. Missiles were removed. Tanks were immobilized. Warships were taken apart until they were little more than metal hulls sitting in guarded harbors. The Varkon commanders watched the reports arrive and believed the planet was becoming safer by the hour. Human commanders watched the same process and understood something else. Earth was being disarmed. Not defeated. Disarmed. There was a difference, but for the first days of occupation that difference felt painfully small. Across the planet, soldiers who had spent their lives preparing to defend cities were ordered away from empty armories. Officers stood inside command rooms where screens still worked but weapons no longer answered. Crews walked past machines they had trained on for years and saw alien guards standing beside them. The loss was not abstract. Every confiscated weapon represented an option that no longer existed. Every destroyed ship narrowed the future. Every seized depot made direct resistance more expensive. The Varkon understood this kind of power perfectly. Remove the enemy's weapons. Break the enemy's confidence. Make the population watch its defenders become helpless. Then wait for fear to finish what the invasion had started. It was a method the Empire trusted because strength, to them, was visible. Strength had weight. Strength produced heat. Strength could be counted in ships, warheads, armored divisions, and firing range. Anything that did not fit those categories was background. That was why Varkon soldiers entered military archives and searched for weapon schematics, but passed civilian shelves without interest. It was why they inspected research facilities but ignored reading rooms. It was why patrols could march past public libraries without slowing down. Old paper did not register as a threat. Books had no targeting systems. Books could not pierce armor. Books could not destroy ships. The soldiers saw rows of shelves and moved on. Some libraries were damaged in the invasion simply because buildings around them had been hit. Others remained almost untouched. Their doors still opened. Their lights still worked. Their shelves still held histories of battles fought centuries before the Varkon had ever heard of Earth. At first, that meant almost nothing. Human commanders had more immediate problems. They had scattered forces, limited weapons, broken supply chains, and an enemy that believed the occupation was already entering its final stage. A direct counterattack would have been exactly what the Varkon expected. It would also have been suicide. The Empire still had the stronger weapons. It controlled the obvious routes. It controlled the captured bases. It expected frightened humans to gather whatever remained and throw themselves against superior firepower. So the humans did not. They waited. They watched. They counted. And while the Varkon continued searching for hidden guns, human commanders began entering places the invaders had already dismissed. Libraries. No alarms sounded when they arrived. No Varkon squads surrounded the doors. No confiscation teams waited inside. There were only shelves. Thus, tables. Maps folded inside old volumes. Accounts of armies that had marched too far. Empires that had trusted fear too much. Commanders who had believed superior weapons could correct every mistake. The humans began reading. Not for comfort. Not for nostalgia. For patterns. One campaign showed an army advancing faster than its supplies could follow. Another showed a stronger force drawn into ground chosen by a weaker enemy. Another described soldiers exhausted by attacks that never came when expected. Again and again the same mistakes appeared under different names, different flags, different centuries. The weapons changed. The mistakes did not. Then the human commanders looked back at the Varkon occupation maps. The attack routes were different. The uniforms were different. The machines were beyond anything those old armies had possessed. But beneath all of it the logic was familiar. The Varkon had entered Earth believing that history belonged to the past. The humans knew better. History was what happened when someone made the same mistake twice. The first pattern appeared in the north. A Varkon armored column began using the same mountain road every third night. It was the safest route between a captured fuel depot and two forward bases. The road was narrow, but the Empire considered that a minor inconvenience. Their vehicles were heavily armored. Their escorts carried enough firepower to erase anything large enough to threaten the convoy. So the humans did not threaten the convoy. They watched it. For 6 nights no one fired a shot. Human scouts marked the exact hour the lead transport entered the pass. They counted the distance between vehicles. They recorded where the column slowed, where the road bent, and how long the soldiers remained awake after reaching the forward bases. The information looked small. That was why it mattered. The Varkon expected resistance to reveal itself through explosions. Instead, the humans treated the occupation like a problem that had already been solved somewhere before. Inside one library, commanders spread old campaign maps across a wooden table. Some showed ancient roads. Some showed rivers that no longer followed the same course. Some showed empires that had disappeared so completely that only their names remained. The details were useless. The patterns were not. A stronger army pushed forward. A weaker enemy refused battle. Supply lines lengthened. Confidence increased. Security became routine. Routine became predictability. One human officer placed a finger on the Varkon route map. Then on an old drawing of a campaign fought centuries earlier. The shapes were different. The mistake was identical. The humans did not attack the armored column. They attacked what came before it. A small supply point vanished during a rainstorm. No grand explosion followed. No dramatic firefight announced the strike. By dawn, fuel containers were gone, communications equipment was disabled, and the few Varkon soldiers stationed there had been forced to retreat. The armored column still departed that night. It simply carried less. 2 nights later, another minor storage site was hit. Then another. None of them seemed important enough to justify changing the entire occupation plan. That was exactly the calculation the humans wanted. The Varkon commander reviewed the losses and saw irritation. The humans saw distance. Every missing supply point forced transport vehicles to travel farther. Every additional kilometer consumed fuel. Every delayed delivery changed sleep schedules. Every changed schedule created another pattern. The Empire responded by increasing escorts. The humans stopped attacking convoys completely. For a week nothing happened. Varkon patrols moved through the mountains expecting ambushes that never came. Soldiers stayed awake longer. Drivers slowed around every bend. Weapons remained pointed toward empty ridgelines. Then the humans struck a depot somewhere else. The Varkon moved troops to protect it. That weakened another route. The humans struck there next. No single attack mattered much. Together, they began forcing the occupation army to move according to decisions made in rooms lined with books. The Varkon still believed they were reacting to scattered resistance. They did not yet understand that the reactions were the target. At another library, human officers studied rebellions from different eras. They ignored the names of kings. They ignored speeches. They ignored who had claimed glory afterward. They focused on what exhausted occupying forces. Uncertainty. False alarms. Interrupted rest. Supplies arriving late. Orders based on information that looked reliable until it was not. So the resistance changed again. Fake radio messages appeared on frequencies the Varkon monitored. One reported a human force gathering near a damaged industrial district. Varkon troops surrounded the area. They found empty buildings. Another transmission suggested an attack near a bridge. The Empire moved armored units to protect it. Nothing happened. A third warned of explosives hidden beneath a supply road. Engineers spent hours searching. There were none. The commander grew furious. He ordered intelligence officers to identify the human command network. They searched for encrypted systems. They searched for hidden transmitters. They searched for advanced military software that might explain how humans were coordinating their attacks. They found fragments. Never the answer. Because the most important calculations were not being made by machines. They were being made by people sitting beneath weak lamps, turning pages. The humans were not trying to beat Varkon technology. They were studying the habits of power. And power, they had learned long ago, became careless when it believed the battle was already over. That restraint cost them something. Every night they waited, occupied cities remained under alien control. Human soldiers heard reports of seized bases and watched enemy transports cross roads they once defended. Some wanted immediate retaliation. The commanders refused. A useless victory that killed the people needed for tomorrow was still a defeat. So they swallowed the anger, closed the maps, and waited for the Empire to make one more familiar mistake. It did soon. The next mistake was larger. The Varkon commander had grown tired of reacting to attacks he could not predict. So he stopped reacting. He consolidated. Instead of protecting every road, every depot, every relay station, he ordered supplies moved into fewer, larger hubs. More guards. More armor. More surveillance. Fewer vulnerable points. On the surface it looked intelligent. Human commanders had expected it. They had seen the same answer in older wars. When a powerful army begins losing small pieces, it often gathers those pieces into something easier to defend. And easier to find. The humans watched the new hubs form. They did not attack them. Not yet. They mapped the roads feeding them. They measured how many convoys arrived each day. They noted which bases depended on which storage sites. They tracked the rhythm until the entire Varkon supply system became visible. One depot fed 3 occupation zones. Another supplied fuel to aircraft station near the coast. A third kept armored units moving through 2 major cities. The stronger the Varkon made each hub, the more important each hub became. That was the weakness. The humans chose the smallest one first. Not because it mattered most. Because the Empire would expect the next strike to follow the same logic. A resistance team sabotaged its loading equipment before dawn. Nothing exploded. No soldiers were killed. But the depot stopped functioning for 6 hours. The Varkon immediately reinforced the remaining hubs. Exactly as predicted. Troops moved. Vehicles moved. Fuel moved. Security moved. And with every movement, something else became thinner. A human commander sat in a dark reading room with 3 old books open in front of him. One described an army defending too many forts. Another described an empire that concentrated supplies until losing one warehouse crippled an entire region. The third described a commander who kept shifting troops toward every new threat until his own movements became more predictable than the enemy's. He looked at the Varkon map. Then he circled one communications relay. It had almost no strategic value by itself. That made it perfect. A false radio message suggested a major human assault was coming there. The Varkon sent reinforcements. Hours later, another message hinted at sabotage near a transport corridor. More troops shifted. Then a third transmission claimed resistance fighters were preparing to seize a captured airfield. The commander moved reserve units again. By the end of the day, the Varkon had repositioned thousands of soldiers. The humans had moved fewer than 50. That night, they cut power to a major supply hub. For 12 minutes. Only 12. But 12 minutes was enough. Automated loading systems stopped. Security doors locked into emergency mode. Convoys backed up outside the perimeter. Drivers waited. Aircraft waited. Forward units waited. When power returned, the depot was intact. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had been destroyed. The Varkon commander stared at the report in silence. He could not understand why an enemy would risk an operation merely to cause a delay. His officers could not explain it either. Because they were measuring damage in destroyed equipment. The humans were measuring damage in time. 12 minutes at the depot became 27 minutes at the transport checkpoint. 27 became almost an hour at the forward base. A delayed fuel convoy forced an aircraft patrol to launch late. That delayed patrol left a surveillance corridor uncovered. The humans crossed through it. They destroyed another relay station. The Varkon repaired it. Then discovered that 3 more transmissions had already been sent through the gap. False ones. Now nobody knew which reports were real. The commander ordered all field units to verify every message twice. Communication slowed. Human commanders had expected that too. The Varkon were becoming more cautious. Caution consumed time. Time consumed fuel. Fuel shortages created delays. Delays created fatigue. Fatigue created mistakes. And mistakes created opportunity. The Empire still held the cities. It still had superior weapons. It still controlled the sky. But inside command centers the mood had changed. Officers stopped dismissing every human attack as desperation. They began studying them. One senior Varkon intelligence officer noticed something troubling. The attacks did not seem connected by geography. They were connected by reaction. Every time the Empire adjusted, the humans appeared to have prepared for the adjustment beforehand. He pulled up weeks of reports. Supply raids. False transmissions. Empty ambush sites. Power failures. Convoy delays. Nothing looked decisive. Together they formed something he could not yet name. He leaned closer to the display. Then he whispered a question no one in the room wanted to answer. What if they are not attacking our positions? The commander turned toward him. The officer looked at the map of moving Varkon units. Beside him, another route shifted because of an alarm that had never existed. What if they are attacking our decisions? For the first time since landing on Earth, the room went completely silent. The question changed the occupation. Until that moment, Varkon intelligence had treated every human action as a separate problem. A stolen fuel shipment. A false transmission. A delayed convoy. A damaged relay. Now one officer began placing the incidents in the order they had occurred. He stopped looking at where the humans struck. He looked at what the Empire did afterward. The pattern tightened. A small loss caused reinforcement. Reinforcement exposed another route. A false warning forced verification. Verification slowed orders. A delay changed patrol timing. Changed timing opened a gap. The humans entered the gap before the Varkon knew it existed. None of the attacks were large enough to explain the effect. That was what frightened him. He requested every report from the first week of occupation. Then every captured human military document. Then every intercepted transmission. He searched for a central command system. There had to be one. Some hidden intelligence network. Some predictive machine. Some surviving strategic computer the Varkon had failed to locate. He found nothing. The commander hated that answer. Then find what they are using. The officer left the command room with the orders still burning in his mind. For 2 days he followed human movement reports through occupied districts. Most led nowhere. One did not. Several people connected to resistance activity had entered the same old public building at different times. They carried no weapons when they entered. They left carrying nothing visible. The building had never been classified as a military target. Its power had never been cut. Its doors had never been sealed. The officer brought up the original invasion survey. The structure had been inspected from the outside and dismissed. Civilian archive. Printed material. No weapons storage. No strategic technology. Low priority. He stared at those words for several seconds. Then he went there himself. The library was almost silent. Broken glass from the invasion still lay beneath one window. Dust covered part of the floor. Shelves rose in long rows beneath weak lights. There were no soldiers waiting for him. No hidden missile racks. No encrypted terminals. No machines humming behind sealed doors. Only books. He moved between the shelves, irritated by the simplicity of it. Thousands of objects made from paper and ink. Records of people already dead. Wars already finished. Empires already gone. He pulled one volume free. Inside were maps. Not Varkon maps. Human maps. Old ones. Arrows crossed rivers. Lines showed armies advancing. Marks beside roads identified supply routes. He turned the page. An army had pushed deep into enemy territory. Its front line remained strong. Its supplies did not. The officer stopped. He opened another book. A different century. A different continent. A stronger force had occupied hostile territory and responded to repeated attacks by concentrating troops around important positions. The smaller enemy had avoided direct battle. It attacked movement, communication, food, rest, confidence. His fingers tightened around the page. He found another account. A commander had received false information and moved reserves toward a threat that did not exist. Then another. An occupation force had increased checkpoints until its own traffic slowed. Then another. A powerful army had trusted fear to suppress resistance. The resistance had used that confidence against it. The officer placed the books side by side. The dates were separated by centuries. The weapons were primitive. The armies had different names. But the decisions were familiar. Too familiar. He pulled up the latest Varkon operational map on his wrist display. A convoy route crossed the screen. He looked down at an old map. The shapes were not the same. The logic was. His breathing changed. For the first time, he understood why the humans did not need to predict Varkon technology. They were predicting behavior. They were not reading the future. They were reading the past. And the Varkon Empire had been repeating it. He turned faster now. Page after page. Surrounded armies. Overextended supply lines. Occupied populations that refused to break. Commanders who answered uncertainty with more force until force itself became a burden. The officer's hands began to shake. Not because the books contained some secret human weapon. Because they contained thousands of failures. Thousands of mistakes. Thousands of examples of powerful armies discovering, too late, that strength did not protect them from bad decisions. The humans had kept all of it. Not just victories, failures, defeats, misjudgments, disasters. They had preserved the evidence of what went wrong and passed it forward. The officer understood the scale of the mistake immediately. The Varkon had confiscated weapons because weapons could be counted. They had ignored memory because memory looked harmless. He opened a communication channel to the commander. The response came sharply. Report. The officer looked around the endless shelves. For a moment he could not speak. Then he lowered his eyes to the ancient battle map beneath his trembling hand. We found their most dangerous weapon. There was a pause. Where is it? The officer looked down the aisle. Books disappeared into shadow in both directions. It was here the whole time. The commander did not believe him. Not at first. He ordered the officer back to headquarters with the books. Within an hour, several volumes lay open across a metal table inside the Varkon command room. No one touched them. The officer stared as if the paper itself might move. The intelligence officer pointed to one map, then another. He showed them an army that had advanced too quickly and discovered that distance could become an enemy. He showed them a stronger force that had spread itself across too many positions. He showed them commanders who had chased false threats until their own soldiers no longer knew which alarms mattered. Then he placed the current Varkon deployment beside those old campaigns. The room changed. One officer stopped moving. Another slowly lowered his hand from the display controls. The commander said nothing. For weeks, he had demanded an explanation for human resistance. Now the explanation was sitting in front of him. It was not advanced. That made it worse. The humans had not built a machine that could see Varkon decisions before they happened. They had collected the consequences of similar decisions across centuries. Every failed invasion had left a lesson. Every defeated army had left a warning. Every frightened ruler, exhausted occupation force, broken supply line, and arrogant commander had added another page. The humans had inherited all of it. And they had been reading while the Varkon were searching for guns. The commander ordered immediate changes. Supply routes were altered. Patrol schedules became irregular. Units were told to stop responding automatically to unverified transmissions. Forward bases received new instructions. The Empire would become unpredictable. For several days the attack stopped. The commander took that silence as proof that the humans had lost their advantage. Then the new problems began. A convoy arrived at the wrong depot because two routes had been changed in the same night. A patrol missed a relief window because its replacement was following an irregular schedule. A forward unit requested fuel from a hub that had already been assigned to another sector. The Varkon had broken their own routines. But they had not broken the human strategy. They had only replaced predictable habits with confusion. The humans watched again. They did not need the Varkon to repeat one exact historical mistake. They needed the Empire to react like an army under pressure. And armies under pressure still had limits. Soldiers still needed sleep. Vehicles still needed fuel. Orders still needed to arrive. Commanders still needed information they trusted. The humans began targeting those limits. A false message no longer moved an entire unit. So they sent several smaller ones instead. A convoy no longer used the same road every third night. So scouts tracked which alternate roads consumed more fuel. A depot no longer supplied the same bases every day. So the resistance watched where shortages appeared after each change. The Empire kept adjusting. The humans kept learning. Soon the commander faced a choice every time a report arrived. Respond and perhaps move exactly where the humans wanted. Ignore it and perhaps allow a real attack. That hesitation spread downward. Field officers began waiting for confirmation before acting. Soldiers stopped trusting sudden orders. Convoys paused when routes changed unexpectedly. No one wanted to be the officer who walked into the next trap. Fear had entered the system the Varkon had built to create fear in others. The commander saw it during a briefing. A warning appeared on the main display. Possible human activity near a supply route. Weeks earlier, 3 units would have moved immediately. Now no one spoke. The commander looked around the room. Every officer was waiting for someone else to decide whether the warning was real. His jaw tightened. Verify it. No one moved quickly. That was the moment he understood what the humans had done. They had not destroyed the Varkon army. They had damaged its confidence in its own decisions. The Empire still possessed more firepower than the resistance could match. Its ships still controlled the sky. Its soldiers still occupied human territory. But power was becoming harder to use. Every order carried doubt. Every movement created another vulnerability. Every attempt to close one weakness exposed another. The commander turned toward the books that had been brought from the library. They had remained on a side table. He had ordered them kept there because he wanted his officers to study the enemy's method. Now he hated looking at them. One volume lay open to a map of an old army surrounded after pushing too far. Another showed a broken supply line. Another described an occupation that had mistaken silence for surrender. The commander stepped toward them. His hand hovered over the pages. Then another report arrived. A small supply point had gone dark. No explosion. No major assault. Just silence. The commander closed his eyes. He already knew what would happen if he reinforced it. He also knew what might happen if he did not. For the first time, the Varkon Empire had reached a battlefield where its strongest weapons could not answer the question in front of it. And somewhere beyond the command room, human officers were waiting to see which mistake it chose. The Varkon commander chose caution. That decision cost him the outer districts. He ordered several exposed supply points abandoned rather than reinforced, unwilling to send soldiers into another human trap. The humans did not celebrate. They moved into the gaps. Roads the Empire had controlled for weeks became unsafe after dark. Small resistance teams crossed routes that had once been watched continuously. Supplies disappeared before Varkon patrols could reach them. Damaged relay stations stayed damaged longer because repair crews now traveled with escorts, and escorts were already stretched thin. The occupation was shrinking without a decisive battle. That was the part the commander could not accept. He still had ships above Earth. He still had armored units on the ground. He still had weapons capable of destroying any human force foolish enough to gather in one place. But the humans refused to gather. They refused to become the target his weapons required. Instead, they kept forcing the Empire to spend strength on empty roads, false warnings, delayed convoys, and positions that mattered less every day. The commander changed tactics again. He ordered aggressive patrols into areas where resistance activity had been reported. The humans pulled back before contact. The patrols found abandoned rooms, cold fires, discarded radio parts, and nothing worth shooting. Then, while those soldiers searched, a supply route 20 kilometers away went silent. The commander sent aircraft. By the time they arrived, the humans were gone. The next day another route failed. Then another. No single loss threatened the Empire. Together they began changing the map. Forward bases received less fuel. Some armored vehicles remained parked to conserve reserves. Patrols shortened their routes. Soldiers who had once entered occupied streets with weapons raised now checked rooftops, windows, alleys, and empty intersections before taking another step. The humans noticed that too. They attacked when Varkon soldiers were tired. Not constantly. Not predictably. Just enough. A disturbance after midnight. Silence for hours. A false transmission before dawn. Then a real strike somewhere else when exhausted soldiers had finally been ordered to rest. The Varkon command staff began sleeping in shifts. Then the shift stopped working. Too many reports arrived at the wrong times. Too many decisions required senior approval. Too many officers feared making the choice that opened another weakness. The Empire had invaded Earth expecting fear to travel in one direction. Now hesitation moved through its own command structure. The intelligence officer returned to the library alone. He did not know what he expected to find. Perhaps another answer. Perhaps a way to reverse what had begun. He walked to the same shelves and opened more histories. Again the details changed. Again the pattern remained. Powerful forces could win battles and still lose control. Armies could hold cities while surrendering roads. Commanders could keep territory on a map long after they had lost the ability to move safely through it. He stopped reading. On the table beside him lay a book describing a defeated empire. Its final pages did not describe one enormous battle. There was no single moment when everything collapsed. There were shortages, retreats, abandoned positions, orders that arrived too late. Then a line on a map moved backward. Then another. He closed the book. Back at headquarters, the commander stood before the current occupation display. Several Varkon positions had already been withdrawn. Not because humans had stormed them. Because keeping them supplied cost more than they were worth. An officer reported another convoy delay. Another reported that a forward unit had fuel for only limited movement. A third requested permission to abandon a small base before its route was cut completely. The commander stared at the display. The shape of the occupation had begun folding inward. He knew what the humans were doing now. That knowledge did not save him. Every response had a cost. Concentrate forces and the humans gained space. Spread forces and supply lines weakened. Move quickly and risk ambush. Move slowly and lose time. Trust reports and chase deception. Distrust them and miss real attacks. The humans had not found one perfect weakness. They had created a battlefield where every Varkon choice carried a price. The commander finally looked toward the intelligence officer. How long can they continue? The officer hesitated. That hesitation answered before his words did. As long as we keep giving them patterns. The commander turned back to the map. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then a new alert appeared. A major supply corridor had been hit. This time the loss was real. Fuel burned at one end of the route while human teams struck a smaller relay farther south. The Empire responded to both. That opened a third corridor. The humans were already there. The commander watched 3 warning symbols appear almost in sequence. His hand rose toward the display. Then stopped. He did not know which one mattered most. Weeks earlier he would have issued an order instantly. Now he stood motionless while officers waited behind him. The library had given the humans no new weapon. It had given them something worse. Proof that powerful enemies could be guided into destroying their own freedom of movement. The commander lowered his hand. Prepare withdrawal options. No one answered at first. The words seemed too heavy for the room. Then one officer quietly began changing the map. For the first time since the invasion began, Varkon arrows pointed away from human territory. The withdrawal began without ceremony. No Varkon broadcast announced defeat. No commander admitted failure. Orders simply changed. Forward units were told to consolidate. Aircraft patrols were shortened. Fuel reserves were redirected toward ships preparing to leave orbit. Bases that had taken weeks to capture were abandoned in hours. The humans watched from a distance. They did not rush the retreat. They did not gather for one final battle. They had spent months teaching the Empire that every road could hide a cost, every message could be bait, and every delay could become a weapon. There was no reason to stop now. So the resistance remained patient. A bridge went unused after a false report. A convoy took the longer route and arrived nearly empty. A patrol waited for verification that never came. The Varkon continued moving backward. Inside headquarters, the commander stood before the occupation map for the last time. Most of the arrows that had once pointed deeper into Earth had disappeared. The remaining ones pointed toward extraction zones. He had imagined this room differently when the invasion began. He had expected surrender documents, captured human commanders, reports proving that fear had done its work. Instead, an intelligence officer stood beside a table covered with old human books. The commander looked at them for a long time. Destroy them, he said. The intelligence officer did not move. The commander turned. You heard me? Yes. Still, the officer remained where he was. Outside, transport engines shook the windows as another Varkon unit departed. The officer looked down at the open pages. Maps. Retreats. Collapsed supply lines. Warnings written by people dead for centuries. Would it matter? He asked. The commander's expression hardened. The officer continued before he could be stopped. There are thousands of buildings like this one. The commander said nothing. Millions of copies. Private collections. Schools. Archives. Digital records. People who have already read them. Silence settled over the room. Destroying one library would change nothing. Destroying every library would still be too late. The weapon had never been the paper. It was what the paper had carried forward. The commander looked back at the map. For months he had believed the humans were somehow staying one move ahead. Now he understood the insult more clearly. They had not known exactly what he would do. They had known what commanders like him tended to do when stronger armies became frustrated. He had supplied the rest himself. Every reinforcement. Every concentration of supplies. Every overreaction. Every attempt to become unpredictable. Even the withdrawal now forming on the display had appeared in books older than his empire's occupation doctrine. His hand reached toward the table. He touched the edge of one page. Then stopped. The intelligence officer watched his fingers curl. The commander tried to speak. Nothing came out. For the first time since the invasion, there was no order left that could restore what had been lost. The room remained quiet except for the distant vibration of departing ships. On the human side, there was no illusion that patience had been painless. Every delayed strike had meant watching another Varkon convoy pass untouched. Every trap required soldiers to remain hidden while occupied districts waited. Commanders had accepted smaller losses of ground so they could create larger failures in the enemy system. They had chosen not to spend lives merely to prove they were still fighting. That restraint had been harder than anger. but it had preserved what the Varkon expected them to waste. By the time the Empire understood the method, the humans still had people capable of using it. That was why the final choice no longer belonged to the invader. Then a human transmission entered the Varkon network. It was not encrypted. It contained no threat, no coordinates, no demand for surrender. Only one sentence. You took the weapons we built, but you left us the mistakes that taught us how to survive without them. No one in the command room moved. The commander lowered his hand from the book. A minute later he ordered the final evacuation. Across Earth, Varkon forces withdrew toward their ships. Armored vehicles that had once rolled through cities as proof of imperial strength were loaded into transports. Weapons taken from human bases remained stacked in alien cargo holds. Captured missiles stayed under Varkon guard. Disabled tanks remained where the occupation had left them. The Empire had succeeded at the task it understood. Humanity had been disarmed. And yet the occupation could no longer sustain itself. The last Varkon ground units left after sunset. There were no crowds waiting at the extraction zones. No human formations stood in triumph. Only empty streets, dark windows, and the knowledge that the people behind them had spent months refusing to fight the war the Empire wanted. The intelligence officer boarded one of the final transports. Before the hatch closed, he looked back toward the city. Somewhere beyond the damaged buildings stood the library he had entered weeks before. He remembered how harmless it had looked. Dust, wooden tables, rows of paper. He remembered his own hand shaking over a map drawn centuries before his birth. The hatch sealed. The transport climbed. One by one Varkon ships left Earth. Their cargo holds carried captured rifles, missiles, components, and pieces of human warships. They had taken everything they had been trained to recognize as a weapon. Below them the libraries remained. Some were damaged. Some had broken windows. Some had shelves coated in dust. But their doors still opened. Inside one of them, a human commander returned a history book to its shelf. He did not salute. He did not smile. He simply pushed the book into place between two others. The shelf became still.
The Varkon took humanity's weapons, but they left behind something far more powerful. The memory of every mistake made before them. In the end, humanity did not win with stronger firepower. It won because it remembered.